Now that Norbash has been added to my project and I return to Unreal, I'll be able to go into my content browser and I'll be able to find the assets here. So I'm going to turn off my search. I'm going to go down to characters for Norbash. I'm going to open up heroes. There's Narbash. We can take a look at his meshes. And this will allow us to bring our fancy orc Narbash into the world. So I'm going to grab his skeletal mesh and I'm going to bring him into the game world. Now, this step is going to take some time. If we take a look, he is currently untextured, and we'll see that Unreal is preparing those textures for us. It's going to take a little time for it to calculate all of the textures and all of the materials and everything that needs to be done to import this complex and detailed character. So I'm waiting for that to be done. As we're waiting, we can continue working. He's just not going to look the way we expect him to look. And what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to move him to the position I want him to be in when the project starts. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Norbash being way off over here. I'm going to rotate him so that he's rotated around, facing the direction that I want him to face. And then once he is in the position that I want, I may have to hit the end key to drop him to the ground. It looks like he is. Looks like he's floating to me, but I guess he's on the ground. Yeah, his feet are touching. Now that he's in the position that I want him to start this cutscene at, I can open up my sequencer and we can start looking at adding him to our first shot. So here's our first shot. Our first shot is going to kind of be one camera shot, one camera view that we want to do. So I'm going to double click to open that. And now here is my timeline, or here is my sequence for what's going to happen in this animation. We have our list of camera cuts. Our camera cuts shows where the camera is going to be viewing and what we're going to see with the camera. It automatically added one cine camera actor, one camera for us to use. This camera that it added for us to use, we'll notice has a little lightning bolt on its name. That means that this actor is spawned. It wasn't in our level before our sequence began, and it'll be deleted when our sequence is over. So we don't have to worry about a bunch of extra cameras hanging around inside of our level. If I right click, I could convert it to possessable, and that's going to be an object that actually exists in the world. And then Sequencer possesses it or takes control of it when the sequence is running. And then when the sequence is over, it goes back to being in the world. We're going to do that possessable with our rock and with our Norbash. Our camera, on the other hand, is spawnable. It's going to come in when we need it, when this starts up. So to start moving this around and getting things set up, we're going to get used to using this idea of having tracks. These tracks represent the different things that we can do. As we move across, this is going to be our timeline that shows where we're going to make those changes. Right now, my timeline is set at 30 frames per second. If I wanted to, I could move this up to 60 frames per second. It'll take a lot more information, a lot more memory to store this sequence, but it'll allow us to have a lot more fidelity and detail in when we choose our keyframes. I'm going to leave mine at 30 frames per second, but that makes it very strange to look at all of my frames as 15 frames, 30 frames is 1 second, 60 frames is 2 seconds. So I'm going to show my time as seconds. If I show my time as seconds, we'll see that that changed the way that this looks, so that now I can see half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, so I can know how long it takes for these different elements to occur. The longer you work in cinematics, the more you'll be able to really judge how long something should take. When should it be 1 second? When should it be 3 seconds? For now, don't worry about it too much because we can make changes to those as we continue to work. So if I want to set up my camera, I don't want it facing like this. What I'm going to want is I'm going to want my camera to start back off to the side, and then it's going to move in to over Norbash's shoulder as he walks up to this rock. So that's the cinematic I'm going to make. Is I'm going to take Norbash, he's going to move up to the rock, and my camera is going to start in the distance, and I'm going to move down behind him so that when he reaches the rock, I'm kind of just over his shoulder at the end. To do this, I'm going to select the camera actor that I'm updating. This is the one that is spawned at the beginning of this sequence and deleted at the end of the sequence. I'm going to pilot it. So if I go over to my actor in the outliner and I right click, I can choose the option to pilot this actor. Piloting this actor means that as I move through the world, I'm actually moving that camera actor. So that object is actually moving. If we look down in our details, you can see the position, rotation changing as I move. So I'm going to start back with kind of a distance shot. So I'm moving my beginning shot back here. And I'm going to set a keyframe that holds this position of my actor. So if I extend my camera actor here, I can find these are all of the different tracks that are currently set up for me to have keyframes. Under my camera component, the aperture is how blurry do things get when they're further away. Same as the focal length, which is like if something gets further away, it starts to get blurry. You can look up the details on how those are set. We'll mess a little bit with our manual focal distance so that we stay in focus on the things that we want to focus. Spawned is whether or not this object exists. Is it spawned at this point? I want all of those to stay at the default for now, but I'm going to change my transform. Here's where I can change my location, rotation, and scale. So what I need to do is move my camera to where I want it to be, move my playhead to where I want it to be. In this case, I want to be at the beginning of this track. So I'm going to come down to this to front. To front moves me to the beginning. And then I'm going to add a keyframe by clicking this little button in between, or by pressing enter. Enter will also add a keyframe. And now it adds a keyframe for my location, rotation, and scale so that my camera actor will be at that position at this point in our timeline. I'm going to need to move my character so that I can see how he's walking before I do my movement of my camera. So I'm going to make sure that Norbash is inside of my level here. So I select Norbash. I go to track, and I'm going to add an actor from my game world to the sequencer. So I go to actor to sequencer, and here's my entire layout. I can find Narbash, or if I have him selected like I do now, he winds up being at the top. So I'm going to add Narbash to my timeline. So now I have a Narbash timeline. Just like before, this is where he's going to start. So I'm going to go to his transform, and I'm going to set a keyframe for where he starts. I'm then going to move my read head to where I want him to reach the target. So I'm going to want him to reach the target at 4 seconds. And I'm going to move him to where I want him to be. So this is just moving him up so that he is now at the rock. And once again, I'm going to set my keyframe. So once I've moved him, so I move the read head first to where I want to have the keyframes. Then I move my actor. Then I set my keyframe. If you need to move him again, so if I wanted to actually move him a little bit to the side and rotate him a little bit, I could always set my keyframe again. And now his keyframe is set with that new information. Once I have a start keyframe and a keyframe where he ends up, as I scrub my read head, we'll see that he changes across that keyframe. So once again, I'm going to go back to my point where I want the two of them to line up. So I'm going to go to 3 second mark. And at the 3 second mark, I'm going to select my camera actor again. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and pilot it because it's easier for me that way to pilot my camera actor, move it to where I want it to be at 3 seconds, which is going to be in like this, kind of looking over his shoulder. And I'm going to set my keyframe. So here's my camera actor. Here's my transform. Here's my setting my keyframe. And then I'm going to move all the way in so that he's almost to his endpoint. And then I'm going to move my actor because I'm still piloting it. And of course, if I want to change how quickly my camera moves, I can change this here. So this camera is now going to move slower so I can get better detail. And I'm going to add my keyframe again. So now we'll see that as time goes, there's how my camera moves. So it comes down like this. And we can see both my camera and my object moving. In my camera actor, I can see what it looks like. All right. So the next thing I'm going to also do is I'm going to change my focal point of my camera. So here I am at my starting point. So to make sure I'm at my starting point, I'm going to make sure I jump to front. I'm going to open my camera component. And we're going to change this manual focus distance. So with that in mind, I'm going to come over here to my camera, make sure my camera is selected, which sure enough it is. If I wanted to select it from here, I can also select it here, and it will select it in my level. So under our focus settings, our focus method is manual. I'm going to choose my manual focus distance. I'm going to actually click on this little eyedropper, and I'm going to select an object in the scene. And that changed my value so that I focused on that object in the scene. And then I'm going to add my keyframe. Now I'm going to move to where I want my next keyframe to be. You see, I accidentally grabbed my start instead of moving my read head. So I want to kind of move away, change my read head here. So there's where I'm getting closer. Here's where I get to that point. I'm going to keep moving in. And at some point around here, I'm going to start shifting my focus so that instead of my focus being on my character, I'm going to start focusing on the rock. So at this point, I'm going to go to my manual focus distance, make sure that I'm still focused on him, set my keyframe, and then as I move in to this position, I want to focus on the rock. So I'm going to set my manual focus distance, but this time I'm focusing on the rock. Adding a new keyframe. So again, remember, move your read head. So move the play head to where you want it to be. Then move your object or change your data. Then set your keyframe. Read head, object, keyframe. And so this is going to give us a cinematic that if I scroll through, I can watch as my actor for my camera runs through. I can also watch this in my other camera view. So if I take this back, I'm going to go back to my split screen. I'm now going to go up to my cinematic viewport. And then I'm going to make sure that my camera cuts here are locked to my current viewport. So my viewport will actually see what my camera is doing. So that when I press play, there's my cool shot and my focus in on the rock. Of course, right now, my guy looks a bit strange because he's just kind of like sliding in T-pose. I want him to play some animations. So our next piece is that we're going to play a couple of animations. So I can go ahead and exit again out of this mode. I'm going to go back to my 2, and then I'm going to go back to my viewport. I'm going to turn off this lock so that I'm not locked to my cutscene. I'm not kind of in cutscene mode. And I'm going to add a new track for our good friend here. So it's not part of my camera actor. It's part of Narbash. And he already seems to have it. He's got an animation track. And I'm going to click on plus animation to add an animation for him. So I'm going to look for a walk animation. I don't see one, so let me scroll through, see what I can find. I think they're going to be jog, right? There we go. Jog forward. And so we'll see now that as we scrub across this read head, oh, it placed it where the read head was. So that's a problem on my part. I'm going to need to move this back to the start so that it happens at the start. Again, I made the mistake. I forgot. Move your read head first, then place your animation. Then, we don't need a keyframe for the animation because it's already going to be set up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend this animation all the way to the end. So that now, as we play, let me go ahead and reconnect, lock my viewport so that I'm watching it in cinematic mode, and I press play. He's playing his jog animation as he runs up there. He gets to his point here at this keyframe, so I'm going to use this jump to keyframe button to get right at that keyframe. And then I don't need him to jog anymore once he reaches that point. So instead, I'm going to add another animation, right? So here's my animation set. And we're going to add another animation that's just going to be his idle when he just kind of stands there. I believe there's an idle short. Most of these characters will have one. Nope, but I can do idle relaxed, right? And then he'll go into his relaxed idle instead. All right, so he's going to play through, and he's going to play through those animations. Now, we may notice he kind of jumps between the two animations. So we're going to want to blend those animations together. In order to blend those animations, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to take his animation and we're going to put it on another track. So that he's going to have two animation tracks. So I grabbed that relaxed and I dragged that relaxed animation up to another track. And so now we'll see there are two animation tracks, one playing his jog forward, one playing his relaxed. If I hold control on my mouse wheel, I can zoom in. If I right click, I can drag over to where I'm looking at it. And now what I can do is I can actually blend these animations together. Okay, when I'm in really close and I've got it set up, I'm going to be able to see where these two animations overlap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add keyframes for both of them. So I'm going to move my read head to where that animation starts. And I'm going to add a keyframe for both of these animation tracks. Then I'm going to move my read head to where that animation ends, and I'm going to add a keyframe for both animation tracks. And the keyframe that I'm changing, the value that I'm changing, is going to be the weight. The way that the weight works is that if your weight is 1, it's going to play whichever animation is on top. So in this case, it's going to jump to idle relaxed. However, I can take that idle relaxed and I can say, even though it ends at a 1, which is fully playing that animation, I can go to this keyframe, I can select it, and I can start at a weight of 0, which means it's not playing that animation. It's going to blend between it and another animation. Meanwhile, I can go down and do the opposite down here. So while my jog will start at a 1, I can end by selecting this keyframe and set that to a 0. And so now we'll see that as it moves between the keyframes, it will blend between the two. And I could always, if I zoom out, we could change the distance between these. So if I want to take these and move this animation so that this is a longer blend between the two, we can increase that blend to make it smoother between the two. And so now we won't have as much of a jerkiness as he goes from one animation to the other. We'll notice at the end of my clip ends here at 5 seconds. I can actually animate and do things beyond the edge of that clip. However, they won't affect my scene because in my master scene, if I go back up a level, I'm actually going to cut to a different scene when that happens. So when that point occurs. So sometimes you want to go ahead and, build your scene out beyond the edge of the beginning and end. But note that you're going to cut inside of our master scene. So now we have our cinematic set up. So again, if I go back, take my read head to the front and I press play, I should be able to watch my cinematic take place. He's jogging forward very slowly. He stops and idles and we kind of move in and look at him. I'm going to then go back up. So let's go back to our first cutscene master. And now we're going to edit our second shot.